Hi, I'm Marlene Winell, and I've been invited by Deborah very kindly to be a part of this program and talk to you today, given that it is the end of the world and we have something to say about that as well. This is Tracy Williams. She and I have been working together for a while, and we're concerned about people today that are I think you said you were wondering what's going to happen to these folks after they find out that it's not actually happening, what they're going to do when it's over. And I would like to talk about the subject more broadly, the whole notion of the end of the world and the rapture and all of that. But let's back up for a little bit and just explain a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from so that you'll kind of get an idea. Yeah.
I'm here with Marlene Winell, who is the author of Leaving the Fold, which is a book to help people who are recovering from religious trauma. And I'm an ex-Christian and also recovering from religious trauma in my past. And so we're here to talk about how teachings like the Rapture and the Second Coming is part of the phobia indoctrination and is part of the fear indoctrination that is part of Christianity.
Yeah, I'm a psychologist and I've been working in this area for about 20 years. I'm also an ex-fundamentalist Christian. My parents were missionaries and I was a Jesus freak for a long time. I certainly believed that Jesus was coming back any day. It was a big, important part of my own adolescence, actually, and meant a lot to me. So this was all very real. And anyway, after that, went to college. A number of things happened. My whole story is actually a chapter in the book. The book is Leaving the Fold, a guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion. It's a self-help book. It's one of the only books like that for people that have already decided that their religion isn't working and they're trying to figure out what to do next, how to understand it, what to do about some of the aftermath, some of the confusion and emotional trauma that they're still feeling, and then how to rebuild their lives. Because I have found that there is a lot of recovery. There really is some damage done to children when they are raised in a fundamentalist environment. There's a lot of fear. There's phobia indoctrination with children that are very small and teaching them to be very afraid. And I think it's child abuse. And that's part of what we're talking about today, because not only are children told to be afraid that they're going to go to hell and told that they are sinful and bad and responsible for the death of Jesus, very small children seeing images of bloody Christ on the cross and then be told that they are responsible for that they personally are sinful and need to be sorry and get saved. And this kind of thing that is actually a trauma, and which sticks with people for many years, many decades, and you can later on decide that you don't believe it intellectually. You've rejected this theology, and maybe you're not Christian anymore, maybe you're even atheist, but you can still be going through some difficulties emotionally, and you can have all kinds of consequences from having this kind of childhood indoctrination.
And you can have flashbacks. Like, I haven't been a Christian for 5 years, but the fear of being left behind is so strong that a couple months ago I was out on my patio with my husband, and I went inside to answer the phone, and when I came out, he was not there, but his phone and his book and his hat was sitting on the chair, and my first thought was that, oh my gosh, I've been left behind. Mm-hmm. And I had to tell myself, you don't believe that, Jesus is not coming back. And I had to calm myself down, and a couple minutes later he came back up from the garage carrying a chair. But those emotions and that fear was just right there.
Yeah, and this was only just recently. So, and Tracy's, this very smart person who is educated and knows who she is, and she's functioning just fine in the world, but she can still have this kind of a thought, and then all these feelings can rush in because of something that you were taught from early childhood. So today, when everybody is talking about this whole end of the world thing, and most people are thinking that it's quite ridiculous and funny, and people are having end of the world parties and that kind of thing. And we are too, you know, because sure, there is a humorous aspect of it, and we also, actually, there's some celebrating of different kinds. You know, we're kind of celebrating our freedom from all of that, and I think actually the Herald Camping Group is celebrating that Jesus is coming back. But nevertheless, there's a serious aspect of this that we want to also address, and that is this whole phobia, indoctrination, and which is what I really would call terrorism. And terrorism is defined as the use of violence or threat of violence to control. And in that sense, if you teach the fear of hell, even if you're just using images, still those images are quite real, and you have images of Armageddon, you have images of Rapture and being left behind. Those are terrifying images. They're terrifying, especially to small children. And so that, by definition, is terrorism. And so if we have millions of people in this country that are hammering this kind of fear into small children's heads, what we basically have is millions of terrorists. And so there's a consequence for that. And then in psychology, which is my field, you look at something like the fear of abandonment, and that's very serious. Okay, there's the violence. Okay, you think about hell and hellfire and all those images that get pounded into children. But then there's this fear of abandonment, this threat of abandonment. And you have to understand that the human being, when humans are born, we're helpless. Human infants are completely helpless. They do not survive without parental care. They're not like other mammals, they're not like other animals that can just continue on their own and take care of themselves and survive. We need about 2 years worth of very close care. And so it's built into our genes to have a life and death relationship with the notion of abandonment. It's a very deeply terrifying. So when you talk about being left behind, that's a horrible threat. And then you have groups that don't necessarily talk about hell as fire or like a fire. You know, they might use things like separation from God. Again, separation, complete separation and aloneness. And Mormons talk about the outer darkness, which is complete abandonment. And this is just simply utterly terrifying and what would amount to terrorism. So I think we need to call it what it is.
I agree. And Christianity is using the idea of the rapture like an emotional weapon, because not only is a child faced with being abandoned potentially by their parents through the rapture, their entire family, all of their friends, and God has rejected them. Mm-hmm. And adding to that is that their children are taught that the world is an evil place, a scary place. If a child is left behind in the rapture, it means that all of the good people in the world are gone, and that the worst possible times are about to befall the earth. Mm-hmm. And because children are protected from the world, this would be a child who does not know anybody else besides their church, mm-hmm. friends and family, who would all be gone. So they're really abandoned alone in the world, mm-hmm. which would never happen in the real world. Mm-hmm. You know, children are abandoned by a parent, but usually there's other people or friends. Mm-hmm. But this is like a really serious form, mm-hmm. and a very serious emotional weapon to keep children in the belief system.
Mm-hmm. And so you're right, you're not just left behind like everybody went to a party without you. You're left behind in a very dangerous, evil environment, a situation that you're not going to be able to handle.
Right.
You're going to be left behind with all the evil people.
Right.
And then all the predictions about the tribulation and all the horrible, horrible things that are going to happen. And then, and all these images have been really elaborated in movies and books about all these awful things that are going to happen if you get left behind.
Right, and you would be left alone to face those things as a child, as a 10-year-old, as a teenager. It's just very, very powerful. And children have dreams about this. This is not the first flashback I've had. I spent my childhood and teenage years, whenever I came home, if people weren't where they were supposed to be, that was my first thought. And I would go through the house opening doors, and each empty room meant, oh, I really didn't believe enough. And then, my mom would appear, or something odd had happened. And then I would just go in my room so nobody would notice that I was crying or that I had been so scared. And then I would, pray again and ask Jesus into my heart. Because I had doubted, it was just proof again that I hadn't been good enough.
Right.
It just is self-perpetuating, and it's a misery. It's a real misery.
Yeah, and so there's a shame connected to it too, because if you're abandoned, then it's because you weren't good enough.
Right.
Right? So then you don't want to tell anybody that that's how you felt.
Right, because everyone knows that you're supposed to be a Christian.
Right, and if you were sure of your salvation, if you were living a good Christian life, if you weren't secretly sinning, then you wouldn't be scared like that.
That's what you think as a child, because you have no way to understand your own fear. So it must be that there's something wrong with you. But it never occurs to you that the story's not true.
But at the same time, you never really have any guarantee, you don't have any assurance, any solid assurance that you're truly saved, right? So I've had many clients that have told me that they prayed the prayer of salvation over and over and over again, an amazing number of times as a child, to just try and make sure that it's going to stick.
Well, the
And
Holy
you never
Spirit,
really know.
Right, the Holy Spirit is supposed to bear witness with your spirit. Well, if you're afraid that you got left behind, evidently, the Holy Spirit's not bearing witness to you, otherwise you would never have been afraid.
Right, so it's like issues of abandonment are well known in psychology, and it's a problem, not just because of the fear of being left alone and now what I'm going to do, because there is the shame involved. Because if somebody abandons you, like if your mother doesn't want you, gives you up for adoption, or you get left somewhere because you're not wanted, it's not an accident. It's usually because there's something wrong with you. Okay, so it's not just fear; it's also shame. And that can just really stick with you and cause you to have this really terrible view of yourself that there's no real solution to, there's no real answer to. Because you can't ever really get any secure answer to whether or not you've done the right thing to guarantee the salvation. So it's kind of an unending guilt cycle. And every time you do anything wrong, you can bring that fear back up again.
And if you're part of a denomination that teaches that you can lose your salvation every time you sin, then those people and those children are even more traumatized, because if they sin and forget to ask for forgiveness, and then the rapture happens, they could be left behind. Every day they could be left behind.
And one thing that's really sad, and this is where it really does become child abuse as well, and it's both the doctrine from the churches, but it's also the practice, the way that this gets put into place, and the way that parents behave in talking about this, and the way that they deal with their children, and thinking that this kind of fear is a good thing. They think that the fear of hell is a good thing, because that'll motivate you to get saved.